Today on the podcast, I have Val Reese. Val, welcome to the show.
Hi, Kevin. I'm so happy we're reunited.
Congratulations on the book launch.
Woo!
So it came out this week?
It came out, less than a week ago, last Tuesday.
Okay, so how has this week been for you? Has it been crazy hectic or has it been calm after all the buildup? How's it been?
It's been interesting, mainly with Amazon inventory. So they kind of messed up the whole like pre-order anticipation of like how many orders. And then right before the holidays, we got like the whole Christmas, oh, it might not arrive in time. So that was challenging. But I think we're out of the woods.
Is this because it was hardcover? It wasn't print on demand, so you had to kind of estimate a print run? Is that what happened?
We were really, so my publisher was focused more on Amazon algorithms and was at the mercy of like what they thought they needed to order. And then they ordered enough for release date, but either it was shipping delays, it didn't arrive on time, or just warehousing things that happen. But somehow there was a disconnect between how many they ordered versus how many actually sold. So I sold out in like 4 hours, which was cool, but not at the same time.
Yeah, that's one of those things where you kind of want to sell out, but you also kind of don't.
Yeah. Like, wait a second, I just drove all this traffic to the Amazon site and you're sold out. What? Yeah.
That sounds like a pretty good thing.
Yeah.
That's much better problem to have than the other one where you have too many books and no one buying them.
That's true. I would rather take the sellout option for sure.
Well, I grabbed my copy and I read through it the other day, and I just remembered, for the listeners out there, Val and I worked together on this book a few years ago, and I remembered like one of our first sessions maybe where you came to me and you had this Google Doc with just like 1,000 ideas in it. Just like crazy amount of research, ideas, concepts. But it was like a bit of a wreck. Mm-hmm. And then I'm sitting here and I'm reading this book and it's perfectly organized. It's so clear. And it was such an amazing example of the journey, the creative journey of how you take 100 ideas and make them 4 or 5 really strong, clear ideas, sequence them in a way that works. I just think you've done such an incredible job on that with this book.
Well, thank you. You know what? You were just a huge part of that, because I remember the very first thing I did was I took out this huge poster board and I wrote the word leadership in the middle. And then I started creating like, that spider web looking thought bubble, right? Where I was like, okay, what are all the things that go into leadership? And, you have next, 50, 60 things, like even just one word things on there. And when I came to you with that Google Doc, I was like, help me organize this. I don't know what I'm doing. And before I even hired you, I spent almost a year of my own time trying to write a little, and I would stop and write and stop. And I got pretty discouraged until I met you. So, yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm so glad that I could be part of it. I mean, the idea with you, the challenge was never you didn't have anything to say or you didn't have experience. As I said, it was like, okay, we've got so much good stuff here. How do we package it?
Yes. And I think a lot of business book, self-help, nonfiction authors usually hone in on like one core concept. Like, for example, communication, but I felt like for leadership, communication, yes, is important. And so were these like 3 or 4 other things to really holistically bring together the concept of how to be a great leader. So that was the challenge we were running into, right? Was how to take all these beautiful things, but not overwhelm the reader. And I think we did a really nice job, like breaking it down so it feels bite-sized and tangible and applicable and practical. So that's been a lot of fun.
Well, I think one of the things you were doing with this book that I would recommend every nonfiction author do is you were teaching material as you were writing it. So you tell me I've got this idea, I've got this concept, and then you go teach it to 100 people and you come back the next week and say, here's what worked, here's what didn't.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. I kind of forgot about that.
I mean, I think that kind of real-time feedback is invaluable.
Yeah. It's a good point because I think a lot of people probably write or build something before they even know if there's a need or before they get the feedback. Totally. So I was blessed in that sense that my clients were telling me what they were needing, and then they were giving me real life feedback. You're right. You're right. That's so important. Even if your listeners, even if they did that for free with somebody, right? If they didn't have 100 people asking for that, but maybe they can get like some sort of beta where they are like, I'm looking for 5 to 10 people. Can I teach this to you? Give me feedback. Even that could work if you're newer to that. Yeah.
That's the thing that one of the dangers of being a writer is it's so solitary, you're so isolated, and it's so long before you're getting feedback on it. That's why I find critique groups where writers sit in a group and read to each other. I think there's some value to it. I think a lot of the time they're giving each other bad advice, though. That's the problem. But the thing is, you can see when you're being boring. You're reading, you're like, I thought this was really good. I'm losing the room. And so the idea of reading the room, which actually kind of ties into your book's content, the idea of kind of emotional intelligence and being able to recognize the individuality of every person in that room is so important to strong leadership and good writing, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and it was part of my journey too. One of the things I realized early on in management was that we have our own little insecurities that come out, right? So if somebody questions us or someone's insubordinate or disrespectful, we wonder, okay, did I handle that the best way? Or am I a good enough leader? Am I valued? And so I realized early on, we have to get through those insecurities to really be influential and effective. Well, it's the same with the writing process. I was writing and feeling massively insecure. Like, what if no one reads this? Or what if no one resonates? Or, what if no one likes this? Like, I just had all these oh no. And I had to walk myself through the same process I was teaching managers, but I was just doing it as an author. So it was like reinforcing the fact that oh, wait, it's working on me. So it definitely will work on other people. And even though the roles are a little different. So that part was really fun.
I think one of the interesting things about our collaboration is that I think we come at things really differently. I tend to grasp onto an idea and then I say, I'll make it work. I'm going with this. Whereas you'll rethink it until you get it perfect. I wish I had your patience. It's interesting because one of the things you're great at is these acronyms, right? Looking at kind of complicated things and then breaking them down into systems and acronyms that are easily digestible and understandable to people. And you're so good at that, but you're so good at it that you're like, well, I've got 6 different acronyms that'll work for this one, right?
Yes. I think taking complex information and making it easy to digest is part of what I do when I train. And so the whole time, because when you're writing a book, you don't have the benefit of real-time questions from an audience. I really noodled how can I say this in the best way that any different type of learning style or personality would really absorb it in a way that felt like they were being guided. That was so important to me. So that's probably why I dissected it so much. It's funny.
Over the process of writing the book, what would you say was maybe the biggest challenge you encountered along the way?
Well, I think for sure the first one was that imposter syndrome. Who am I to write a book? And you start comparing yourself to somebody with a TED Talk, at least for my industry, or a PhD, and then you have to remember that everybody brings something different to the table. So I had to get over that. That was one of the challenges. I think there were multiple, Kevin. Hold on. Let me break them all down. Challenge number 1. Challenge number 2 was just writing it. I mean, I remember one thing that you were really good at was you were just kept saying, just write a shitty first draft. Just get it out, get it out, get it out. And I have a bit of a perfectionism to me. And so that was really hard for me to write something that didn't look perfect at first. But you just kept reminding me that we had to start somewhere. So getting over that was probably the second hardest. And then I think the third hardest part is finding the right editor, right? Because they have to be able to match your tone and your style and tighten up the language, but make it so it's not, you're not losing your voice. So that was the third. And then I think honestly, the fourth has been marketing it, is getting the word out, because Amazon's saturated with nonfiction and business book authors. So you're not going to get necessarily found with keyword searches. So that's a whole nother world.
Yeah. I mean, and you also have, there's no real life book events going on for the most part. You know, it's like you've got a book launch, but it's almost, I'm guessing, probably a 90% online launch due to COVID and other factors.
Yeah, we went with an influencer strategy, which was really about who in my network would benefit from this book, what other authors or speakers or podcasters have an audience that would benefit, and then who's willing to share the message with the world and their audience. And most people were willing, and it was just being comfortable with asking for that help, which was, I'm more of a giver, not always the receiver. So it was really hard for me to say like, hey, would you do me a favor and like read the book or share it with your network? But most people were willing to and really enjoyed doing so because it could help somebody.
I mean, that was a lesson I learned for years with my coaching. I was like, I'm doing it all myself. I'm going to build my own audience. You know, I don't need anyone's help. But then I put together a summit that had like 25 different, experts who I interviewed, and we promoted the event collaboratively, and like, thousands and thousands of people signed up. Whereas if I had done it on my own, hundreds and hundreds would have signed up. And it was a real great lesson that, I didn't lose anything. I won. Everyone won. The other people who participated won. The audience won because the message reached them. So it can be so difficult to ask for help, and yet so effective at times.
Yes, you're so right. You're so right. I think sometimes we think we have to just do everything on our own. And that's probably a really great reminder to everyone listening, and even to myself, is that we don't have to go at life alone. I know sometimes resources are limited for people, like can't afford to, but there's so many ways to also get support without spending thousands and thousands of dollars too. Yeah.
Well, that's something you've seemed always willing to do, is collaborate with others to make the book as good as possible. What's that experience been like? Obviously, you worked with me, but I know you worked with a whole other team of people as well. What's that been like, collaborating to get your message out into the world?
Yeah. So, I definitely had my own intuitive process, which I really recommend people lean on that. But I think before I even started writing, I had interviewed a dozen leaders in the space on the topic of what I was wanting to write about. So I interviewed and asked them, I don't know, each like 10 questions. And so what that did was that actually validated that I was on the right path, that we were all really feeling the same things and recognizing the same things about what makes a great leader. So, but now I had a dozen people that were going, oh, she's writing a book. So when it came to me needing endorsements, those were the 12 people I went to. It was really great. And they right away beta tested or read it in like beta form before it ever even really got fully edited. So for them to start saying, I'm liking this, it was helpful. I needed that validation. And then they're in the book. Their endorsements are there. So that's great. And now that's a dozen people that will recommend it to their network. So that's also really helpful. Mhm.
Looking back at our time together, one of the, I think maybe the biggest challenge for me was trying to land on the name for the book.
Ah!
You and I were going back and forth again, and I kept being like, Val, this could work, Val, that could work, and you kept saying, no, Kevin, that's not it. We're not there yet. And so when we stopped working together, it still didn't have a name, I don't think. And then when you reached out to me, or I reached out to you, whatever it was, when we reconnected, getting ready for the book launch, and I saw Chief Inspiration Officer, I was like, boom, she nailed it. And that was that one thing. I so wish I'd been able to help you get there. But it was just out of my reach somehow. So tell me a little bit, how did you finally land on the title?
Yes. Well, so for one, you definitely pushed me in the right direction. I also had to just continue to remind myself, like, it'll come, it'll happen when it's supposed to happen. But in editing, we started naming the chapters. And there was one chapter that I actually think you named How to Motivate a Team. I think that was like one, we just like as a placeholder, how to motivate a team. And it was like, okay, that's good, but we could probably name this chapter something better. And so the editor named it Chief Inspiration Officer. And I said, that's not the title of the chapter. That's the title of the book.
Oh, aren't those moments amazing?
Yes, yes. And we always had the subtitle though. How to lead the team.
Right from the start,
yeah.
I think. Yeah.
We always knew how to lead the team everyone wants to be on was like the core thing.
Yeah, your vision for the book was like clear from the beginning. It was just how we were going to get you there. What was the best path to that end point? But I mean, you came into this project very clear on who you were and what you wanted to say about leadership.
I remember like we were working and like we started, for anyone who's never worked with you, I mean, it was like such a beautiful process because you helped me organize my thoughts, and then I would go write, and then we would then look at what I wrote, and I would say, this is feeling good, but this is feeling off. So you would help me work through it. And then I would fine tune that. And I remember when you edited my first chapter, like you just kind of went in and it actually started to feel like a real life book. And I was like, oh my gosh, I see this. And it was that moment of just pure enthusiasm where you start to see that your sentences take a life. And I remember you sprinkled in the visual aspect, which as a writer, I didn't know how to do that. Like, do you remember that story about when I went out in the field to ride along with one of my employees,
mm-hmm.
and he picked me up and he was nervous and you were like, and his, he was sweaty and his car was littered with gum wrappers. And I was like, oh, wow. Like I have a visual instead of just saying he was a mess, like you were able to like make it so you really feel like you're there in that moment. And you were teaching me how to do that. So my head was not there. So I love that you did that because we wound up using stories in like every chapter. I mean, every chapter just opens with a story.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think the timing on this book couldn't have been better. I mean, throughout the pandemic, we've been hearing about work shortages, people refusing to go back to work for bosses, this whole shift in the labor movement. Who knows even where it's going to end up on the other side of the pandemic. But I mean, your book seemed to, we were working on this 2 years ago. You seem to have seen this coming on this horizon, the idea that old school management is dead, that the modern leader is the empathetic leader.
Mm. Well, somebody who just read it, that reviewed it, said it best. And I was like, why didn't I think of this? He said, you can only have one CEO, one COO, one CFO, but you can have multiple chief inspiration officers. And that gives me chills because it's so true. And it doesn't just have to be the leader. It can be mentors. It can be anyone on the team can be inspirational to other people. And what that does is it creates engagement. it creates employee engagement, it creates collaboration and unity. So when you're feeling alone on your island because you're working remotely, and now everyone on the team is wanting to connect and unite and understand each other and celebrate each other and lean on each other, and the leader is creating that environment, it's empathy, and it's also so much more, because now you feel part of a community, and that does increase productivity. So it's just a different way of looking at things. Yeah,
Absolutely. And it's so interesting, the book, because it's a leadership book, and this is something that was there right from the beginning as well. You always said, well, it starts with improving yourself. Like, long before you go in there and tell your team how to get better, you have to honestly look yourself in the mirror and say, am I being the best me I can be? Because you can't inspire your team if you're not inspiring yourself. Can you talk about that?
yeah. I remember I got promoted, and you get focused on forecasts and budgets and deadlines and hitting goals. And when a team member doesn't do the things that you're expecting them to do, you start to get irritable and stressed, and you feel pressure. It is kind of like that feeling when you're a teenager and you're thinking your parents will never understand you. And then one day you become the parent and you're like, you need to do this because I told you so, right? And you forget that that's not what you wanted as a teen. And that's what happens when people get promoted into management roles. So you're so focused on all these things, and next thing you know, you're leading from a place of frustration, and that's going to impact your communication, your tone, the things you say, your influence. So we got to get out of what I call this metaphorical cave, right? Like, if we're in a cave, we can still lead, we can still check emails, we can still communicate, but are we going to be doing it as effectively and influentially as possible? So it does start with us, and we have to recognize, of course, CAVE is an acronym. Well, it stands for, C is criticism, like when we start to criticize what people are doing. And A is assumption, when we start to assume people will never do it like we do it, or they're never going to do it good enough, or they're never going to respond the way we want. And then V is we victimize ourselves, really, like, okay, I'm doing something wrong, I'm failing, what if? And then E is we get into these enclosed patterns where we start to act maybe a little bit more defensive or passive aggressive, or we start to micromanage. We all have these like default tendencies. So when we're in the cave, it's hard to be inspirational, so we got to get out. And when we're out, the light just comes our way, and we attract more creativity and more enthusiasm and collaboration, because people feel safe, they feel heard, they feel valued. And it's in that space that we're really creating team effectiveness.
And I think the thing that's amazing about what you're teaching is, maybe as a chief inspiration officer, you're going to transform the whole company, but maybe not. That's a big challenge, but you can create a microculture within a larger organization. Tell me a bit about that idea.
Yeah, the idea is that many managers wait for the executive team, the HR team, the all hands-on company meeting to communicate things to their team. And then their team recognizes, oh, there's this unknown happening in the organization, but we don't really know what's happening. And my thing is, okay, look, don't wait for those things, because they might come soon, they might not. Just create a microculture that's thriving within your team. I don't care how much dysfunction is going on around you. You can control what's in front of you. So create that environment. And you know what? And if the next department head can create that environment, and the next department head, it gives the executives time to breathe and communicate and get clarity. And even if you don't know what's happening, your team's going to appreciate that you saying, hey, I don't know what's happening. I know there's change. I know we're may go through a merger. I know this is scary, and I don't have all the answers, but here's what I do know. And you know what? In the meantime, let's focus on why we're here. Let's focus on the product. Let's focus on the customer. Let's remind ourselves what's important. It's those things. We have to reunite people back to why they go to work every day.
One of my favorite stories in the book is the one about the employee who kept showing up late because her tire was flat.
Hmm.
Can you
Hmm.
tell that story for the listeners and maybe, what you took from that experience and why it's in the book?
Yeah. Okay. So that came from one of my interviewees, Joel Carson, who was the VP of, I think it was an engineering company at the time. He had a director that was getting really frustrated with one of their employees because they were always late to work. And the employee, other than being late, was pretty good employee, but their role required them to clock in on time. And he went, the director went to the VP, Joel, and said, I think I need to let her go because I keep warning her and I keep reminding her and it's not changing. And Joel got on the phone with the employee and said, You're a really great employee. What's happening? And she said that she is having a hard time getting to work because her car keeps failing. And lately it's her tires, and she doesn't have the money to replace her tires. She's gotten a few flats. She's had to repair patch holes. Her alignment's poor. Like there were all these things going on with her tires. And so Joel asked her, if you had new tires, could you get to work on time? And she said, yes, but right now I'm taking the bus and it's making me late. So he said, I tell you what, I'm going to write a one-time check and I'm going to pay for a brand new set of tires for you. And that was it. Like she was just the joy in her heart, the loyalty, and then she went above and beyond and she was recommending friends to the organization and she worked even harder. And it was just to pay for a brand new set of tires, but she felt heard. He asked questions. He got curious and he was able to offer a solution. That story brings me chills. I love it.
I love it as well. It's such a great example of when we think about being a leader and being in an organization and having problems that you need to solve.
Mm-hmm.
It's so the opposite of like the traditional, punitive approach or, keep it work focused. Like he took the time to figure out who she was and what the problem was and actually solved the problem. And in doing so, created an utterly dedicated employee. I love that.
Yes. Yes. I love that story. And as you're saying it, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do a social media post on that story because it's just so profound and so wonderful. And I get it. Not every company can just, spend the money on new tires, but what we can do is ask the questions and what we can do is try to understand. And wow, that's huge, right? Just to have an employee feel heard. And not that we want excuses. We don't want that. But we certainly, in this case, she was a good employee, right? She wasn't someone who made excuses for everything. So I think being willing to have an open mind when that happens is really huge. Mm-hmm.
I think you've hit on something important there too, because, I've talked about this is an empathetic approach to leadership. And I think someone might misread that as, oh, it's kind of like, soft hand, kid gloving the employees or whoever. But you make it very clear in this book, demanding high expectations is part of being that inspirational force, is saying, that's not good enough. I know you can do better.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought that up because I think leadership's a balance. And we are balancing three things. We are balancing being passive, so knowing when to step back and letting somebody fail and letting somebody, to empower them, to delegate to them and let them take processes over and watch, even if they're making mistakes. So it's knowing when to step in and step out. And I think the second thing is knowing when to be encouraging, right? When to acknowledge and appreciate. And some people do that all the time. They're like, rah, rah. And they cross that friend zone, maybe too much, right? So then there's that third thing we have to balance, which is this high standards. And it's knowing that we want to set the bar high. We want to drive people to that excellence. And we believe that they can do it. And when you're balancing these three things constantly, then you are getting more of what you need and you're bringing people along with you. So yeah, it's not just like sitting back and being nice. Right. Certainly that's cool, but We need results too.
Well,
Yeah.
as I think of myself, unfortunately, definitely like a glass half empty kind of person. I always see the risk in every situation. I'm a bit of a negative ninny or whatever. Um, but something I learned from you in the creation of this book is this idea of the magic wand technique, where, you know, if I'm in a situation and I'm like, well, I've got this problem, I'm never going to be able to do this. You're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Let's magic wand those things away and look at it from a different, fresh perspective. And I thought, as someone who's not necessarily an optimist, that was such a useful thing for me to learn. So, can you explain that technique a bit for the listeners?
Sure. I think that it's easy to focus on what we don't have, what we don't like, what we don't want. We all get into those patterns. And I so appreciate that you're like, yep, this is me, you know, this is how I do it. And so for you, that's like, that awareness is so wonderful, right? So you can catch yourself. And certainly some people, there's like a scale of like, which glass half empty, glass half full, right? But in general, yeah, when things don't go away, it's easy to forget, well, what is it that I want? You know, what is it that if there was no obstacle, there's no worry, and I had this like magic wand and I could just say, poof, I have what I want. What does that look like? And again, when I do that exercise with people, they start telling me, well, it's not possible because of blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, nope, 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 nope. You know, like, you have a magic wand. It could do anything. And it's from that space we dream a little bit more. We get more visionary. We get more focused on solutions instead of problems. And it's just a simple question that redirects our thinking into what's possible. And it's just another tool in our toolbox, right? So sometimes, let's say somebody has an employee that's not working out, right? And they're complaining and talking. Well, what would you want from this employee? What would be like your ideal scenario? And then they start telling me, I want an employee that is like this and like that, and is reliable and coachable and positive. And it's like, great. Now, what do you need to say to this employee, right? Because you're going to speak from a place of what you want and what you're hoping to get, versus speaking from a place of what you don't like and what's frustrating you, and that you're defensive and they're defensive back, right? So it's that subtle technique and that subtle shift that can make all the difference in the world.
Well, we've touched on different areas of the book. We might as well get into CRAVE now. Let's
we're going all in.
Well, that's kind of like the core of the book, I think. It's kind of like the beating heart of everything. So tell me about CRAVE.
Okay, so I remember my boss was fired and they brought in a new boss, and it was weird because I loved my old boss. I felt like I was like, you know, even though he was let go, I felt like I was like somehow like cheating on him or something because I was like working with this new boss. But I thought, okay, well, if they're bringing the new boss in, maybe he's going to bring something different to the table. So I was wrong. I was pretty much left alone for about 6 weeks. And then when he did see me, he pretty much just told me what to do and how to do it. One of the things he wanted me to do was fire my supervisors. And there was just so many things to consider to that decision. So I remember walking away from several meetings with him thinking, wow, he really doesn't know what I am craving from him. And I thought, well, that's interesting. What is it that I'm craving? And I started writing all these things down and realizing, like, we need to step into the world of our employees to understand what it is they want, because when we give them what they want, we get more of what we need, right? It's just inevitable. So CRAVE stands for connection, which we could also say is like a community. People want to feel like part of that community. Reliability. They want appreciation. They want to feel valued, and they want effective communication. And I was getting none of that from him. And I was a pretty highly engaged employee, but I felt completely disengaged. when he came on and I started looking for new jobs. And that right there is why people leave their boss. So if you could at least give 4 of the 5, you have people that will stay much longer than when you give none of those 5. Yeah.
It's funny, you were saying one of the biggest challenges you faced in the book creation process is the marketing now that you've launched it. Well, I got to say, book marketing is like a series of difficult conversations, which is one of the latter portions of the book. So can you see any of the lessons learned from difficult conversations being applied to this idea of selling the book and talking about it and asking for help from other people?
Oh, that's interesting. I think that asking for help, I guess we touched on it earlier, asking for help is not necessarily what I do best. You said it too, like, I'll just do it on my own, right? The difficult conversations chapter is really how to take an uncomfortable scenario and pivot it into a more mutually beneficial scenario. So I guess in looking at it from that perspective, it is about how can what I have to offer benefit what you're also doing, right? So there's a win-win, and we're giving and receiving equally. I think that's the message there. We're listening. It's not all just about us, like do this for me and do that for me and sell and in your face, like not big on that. So yeah, I think it's a reciprocation that we need to remind ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think it applies so much to book marketing. Every single writer I work with, they go, "Oh, you're not going to believe this, but I'm really not into marketing." No one is. You're not unique. We all hate it. But you do that mindset exactly like you said, where you say, yeah, marketing my book is a difficult conversation, but I'm going to get into this mutually beneficial mindset where it's like, I know my book is good and I know it can help you. So I'm going to tell you about that. I'm not going to sell you or be sleazy or something. I'm just going to say, I put my heart and soul into something that I really think could help you. And it's up to you if you want to accept that help.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is, social media obviously is kind of a big thing these days. One of the things I have to constantly remind myself about is, okay, so I have a post and I want people to engage on that post. And most people do. And then I have to turn around and say, wait, but how often have you engaged in other people's posts, right? Because you can't just always expect people engage in what you say, and then you never reciprocate. And I think that's part of, it's easy to like, or happy face something, but it's in the connection is built when you can say something a little bit more meaningful in the post. And yes, that's time consuming. And some people really do hate that. And at the same time, if that is one of your marketing strategies, you want to think about, well, how often do I do it in return? Instead of just expecting everyone to do it for you. So, yeah.
Well, speaking of book marketing and looking to the future, what do you have in the next months and years, I guess, ahead of you in terms of rolling out the book, but also your business? We haven't even talked about your business. I mean, the whole time you're writing this incredible book, you're also running your coaching leadership business.
Yeah, it's been quite fun, actually. So I turned the book into an online course. So the online course pretty much follows it, but what they also get is access to me. So I'm running the course probably 3 or 4 times a year. It's to be determined at this point. They can also do it evergreen, but I just think that that's such a great way to get in front of all the specific exercises and conversations, and maybe be in a community where you're able to bounce ideas off and get some real life coaching, and opened up the Facebook community for people taking the course. But I offer the first module for free in the book. So there's like a coupon code that they can get, and that takes them to the course. So the business is really focused on either executive coaching, in-person live training, or this course. So that's like the 3 ways people can really absorb this information to complement what they're reading in the book if they felt like they needed that extra resource.
All right. Well, we'll include links to all of that in the show notes for this episode. But if we want to give them one call to action, what do we want them to do here? Do we want them to check out Executive Muse or just go buy the book?
Well, if they check out Executive Muse, they'll get a free chapter of the book.
Okay, there you go.
So that's what I would do. And if they like what they read, then go buy the book. And then they have access to the first module of the course. They know where to go already. I have a free quiz on my website. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
Well, Val, it has been such a pleasure getting to chat with you again. I miss our calls, and I cannot tell you, I am so proud of the work you put into this book. I know it wasn't always easy, and I know how much time and energy and heart and soul you put into this book, and to have it come out on the other end so great. I mean, I was sitting there reading through it the other day, and I was just like, my heart was alive. I was so happy for you. So congratulations on this incredible book. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. Yay. I so appreciate you, Kevin. Like, you're in there. Did you see your name?
I did.
Yay.
No, not that I'm super focused, but I saw my name twice. And that was pretty cool. I was in the front end and the back end, so I couldn't ask for more. Thank you so much, Val. And thank you for being the guest on the show today.
You're welcome. That was so fun to catch up like this. I really appreciate it.